Well, I believe that over a period of time, successive heads of the judiciary, in terms of Chief Justice of Nigeria, as the case may be, they've dwelled extensively on how to circumvent some of these issues that naturally lead to delay. And I believe that whilst others have looked at ways and means of handling it, the incumbent Chief Justice of Nigeria seem to have pinpointed ICT technology as a way forward. Mark you, I am of the opinion, rightly or wrongly, that when people talk about restructuring to a very large extent, there are also elements or segments of that that should be attributed to the judiciary. In the first instance, are we supposed to be sending land matters or land-related matters or chieftaincy matters or chieftaincy-related disputes flowing from my hometown in Asaba to the Supreme Court in Abuja? Is it not something that is capable of ending somewhere? If there is a court of appeal, a state court of appeal somewhere in Asaba, can that matter end there and terminate there? You still have land matters from the southeast that are still coming to the Supreme Court. These are issues that should end up at the state level or at a zonal level, whichever way you look at it, and then the Supreme Court is spared that agony. The Federal Court of Appeal is also spared that challenge. So we need to be thinking out of the box in trying to address certain issues. So when people talk about restructuring, there are some cardinal aspects of it that obviously should pertain to the judiciary and the process of litigation generally. But over and above that, like I said, Honorable Justice Onogen, GCON, seem to have highlighted the idea of ICT, and to that extent we agree with him that there are certain things we must do that we were not doing before, which can help us to make sure that we expedite action as far as the judicial process is concerned. Maybe the dockets will be reduced, some of those matters can be done expeditiously, and the delay that we're always complaining about, we can do away with. Again, if we know the subject matter that causes most of the delay, how do we deal with interlocutory applications, injunctions, and what have you, when matters are ongoing and somebody will take an injunction and is denied, apply for injunction ex parte, you are denied, and you go to the Court of Appeal and you go to the Supreme Court, all in an attempt to stall the action because the merit of the matter is not yet determined, amongst other things. So what do you do in the circumstance? So is there a way we can now say, as some used to do or are now doing, that look, especially in matters having to do with corruption, as the case may be, that no, we take everything together. If you are not satisfied with the way we have dealt with your preliminary observation, initial preliminary observation, then let us go forward and take everything together. So the courts are also trying to find ways of circumventing these naturally hashed plots of counsel to make sure that they stall litigation. So if they're able to achieve that to a very large extent, I think we can kiss goodbye to delay in the administration of justice. And of course, I must add that with amendments to some of our laws and with the new Administration of Criminal Justice Act, I think we are achieving so much. So we must applaud the whole process for our coming up with such a
well, that was where we were going to go to next, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act. It's about 3 years now.
Yeah.
So how well has that done?
Very well. Very well. Well thought out. I must commend those whose vision led to the fruitful enunciation and legislation of that particular enactment. One must commend them. And then, of course, for purposes of implementation, I believe that it is going very well from what one can see. The number of adjournments you can have within a given period and the duration which a case will last before judgment is given. So far, so good in that regard. And we must commend the judges who sit there and ensure that people adhere tenaciously and strictly to the dictates of the law. So I believe that it's a welcome development. I must give kudos to everybody who is connected with the enunciation and, of course, the implementation of that act.
Well, a little bit on the matter of corruption here and cases arising from corrupt practices and all that. How do you respond when people say, well, people deliberately do the things they do with impunity, knowing that at best you'll end up in court and it would take 5, 6, 7 years, and at every point in time they can stall the process? And how do you respond when they say it is lawyers who encourage this, mostly the senior lawyers?
Well, I believe to the uninitiated, initiated in the act of law and legal practice and legal process, that may sound plausible, but certainly not the case. But firstly, to say that with the administration of criminal justice, we can say no. There are ways of ensuring that criminal matters, once they start after proper investigation, things are handled expeditiously and timeously, as the case may be. So we've been able to take charge of that. Well, for others, whatever the senior lawyer may want to do, senior advocate or not, or what have you, I believe that we're on the right track now. If you want to stall a matter, the judge takes charge of his court. The judex is there to control his court. And what the court can do is to make sure that when adjournments are being proposed unnecessarily, it is the court that determines what will happen. So we deplore the fact that, yes, to an extent, senior lawyers take part in this, and all lawyers are expected to also do some of those things. But that notwithstanding, I believe that the decision, and the last decision, rests on the table of the court, and that is the judge. And the judge will determine which way to go. The judge will determine whether to accept adjournment or not. The judge will determine whether to go on with the matter or not. Whatever decision the judge takes is binding on the lawyer, whether you're a senior advocate of Nigeria or not. So to that extent, I want to urge that all parties, all those who worship in the temple of justice in this country, for whichever case, whether corruption matters or otherwise, should be guided by the law. And the law, for purposes of criminal matters in this context, is the Administration of Criminal Justice Act.
Still on that, they say it's extremely difficult to prove cases of corruption in court, especially where huge sums of money are involved. Someone has dipped their hands into the public treasury and taken away huge sums. And sometimes it becomes extremely difficult because a prosecution has to prove that they have done that. Now, a man who has devised a way of stealing public funds definitely would have had time to think about it and to perfect his strategy. And here people say, well, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. But a small segment have said, look, let's change it when it comes to matters of corruption like this, and say, look, the onus should be on the accused to prove their innocence. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't have any issue with that. I don't really have any issue in that, because as a student of the adversarial process and the accusatorial process or the inquisitorial process that obtains in continental Europe, you should be conversant with the fact that what we operate in this country is that the adversarial system and the presumption of innocence is based on that. That's what we copied or inherited from the English legal system, and that's what we are operating. But that does not in any way suggest that is the sole prerogative that it obtains everywhere in the world. No, that is not the position in continental Europe. Now, some of us, over a period of time, in course of our pursuit of scholarship, have argued that there should be a hybrid between the adversarial system and the inquisitorial system in some instances. If we are seriously concerned about what we are talking about, that we are no longer comfortable with the presumption of innocence in all matters, time has come then for some of us to say, okay, how do we think and form the hybrid between the inquisitorial system and the accusatorial system, so that in in matters of this nature, we should start thinking of changing the standard and the burden of proof to move it away from the way we have practiced it all along. But for those who are not conversant and deeply aware of the fact that there is this accusatorial system and there is need for us to study exactly what they do in their own instance, it's assumed that you are presumed guilty until you decide otherwise. So if we now say for corruption matters that this is the way we want to go, it's purely our decision. But the important thing is that it must be founded on law. In other words, a good number of people will say time has come for it. I don't believe that it should be a question of imposition by either the courts or by the agencies responsible for prosecuting, as the case may be. We must come to terms with the fact that we have tried this and we need to water it down a little bit in writing, in law, that presumption of innocence will hold in certain matters. But however, where the need arises and it has to do with this, there might be need to contract out of this initial presumption of innocence. If that is in writing, I believe that Nigerians will welcome that, and that obviously can hold sway.
What are your views on plea bargaining?
I believe that, again, it's tangentially or inextricably intertwined with what we have just said. If you cannot prove sufficiently to convict, you can plea bargain so that you don't lose out in totality. So plea bargain is a welcome development that comes to assist the process, so that instead of losing out conclusively, you are taking away something substantial that you can say, this is what I've achieved.
Prof, but that's the question. How do you now determine that what you've been able to take away from this person is substantial? The Nigerian society is a closed one, but people see a lot of things. They know that somebody has been living above their means. They know who that person was, and they now see who that person is, but they may not have the way to prove. And so, in the eyes of the public, someone does a plea bargain, and he refunds, XYZ amount of money. And people are saying back there, they say, oh, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. He probably has 100 times more than that is hidden away.
Well, 100 times more than that you cannot establish. So that tip of the iceberg is more than enough in the circumstance. Instead of him going scot-free because there's no conviction and there's no possibility of conviction, the little that is gotten from him can still serve a purpose. But like we have said, time has come possibly for us to revisit some of these things. The issue of process of crime and some of the other related issues. Now, is it possible when the whistleblowing aspect of it came on board, it worked to a very large extent? I don't know what became of it. It seemed to have died a natural death for one reason or the other. Either it was compromised along the line, or people are no longer forthcoming, or whatever is supposed to be due to those who blow the whistle, or the interest of the whistleblower is no longer protected. These are all major challenges. Or people blow whistle for the wrong reason, and obviously just to ensure that somebody is obviously embarrassed, as we have just noticed recently. So there must be a concerted way of ensuring that we do some of these things in a way and manner that the interest of the public at large is preserved, and to a very large extent, we do not, in the course of pursuit of an individual, compromise the general interest of the public.
The general public, the ones that you might call the uninitiated, the ones who don't know a thing about law, they are confused a lot of times about the practice of law, especially in terms of cases in court. And sometimes they wonder about the quality of prosecution. And it is said that many of these cases, particularly in the matter of corruption, have been lost for lack of quality prosecution. And so sometimes you do find people who say, well, if a matter is in court and it is very obvious to the trained mind that the prosecution is not getting it right, well, shouldn't someone step up? Well, they say the judge, cannot determine that it's only based on arguments before him. But the public doesn't see that. What do you say?
Well, again, two issues flowing from the question. One, and let me take the latter, it is still the same adversarial system. It is the same adversarial system that says that a judge should not descend into the arena. In the inquisitorial system, the judge can descend into the arena. So where the lawyers are not forthcoming, the judge can descend into the arena and do what is needful in the interest of justice. The judge can descend into the arena. But here, based on our inherited legal system and legal practice and the processes, the judge is excluded from doing so. That's one. Secondly is the issue of the prosecutor. How well is the prosecutor trained? I'm sure that a lot is going on. I'm sure that the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies presently is still involved, together with the Office of Attorney General, in ensuring that the prosecutors are given the best training possible. But again, we don't take the prosecutors in isolation. We cannot draw a distinction between the prosecutor and the investigator, because the prosecutor is fed with information from the investigator. So if the investigator is shot, the prosecutor cannot produce magic, because the ammunition you get is what you utilize in court. Now, the fundamental question is that where there is evidence that you don't have abundant or enough or sufficient ammunition with which to prosecute a matter, is it necessary that you should commence in the first instance? Because you already know, in terms of projection, that this matter is not going to fly. So you have to be very careful. And secondly, or thirdly, as the case may be, is the issue. I've made a point repeatedly whilst on the saddle as the Director General, and I keep making that point. We don't even bother to put into consideration the cost of prosecution in this country, which is very enormous. In any civilized clime, people weigh the cost of prosecution. In some instances, it costs millions and millions of naira to prosecute. That is the truth of the matter. And exposure to the United States of America and every other place will tell you that for the sheriff and the county attorney to prosecute, it is abundantly clear to even the blind that they are going to get conviction out of that matter. I think we should be walking along that line to ensure that we don't prosecute for the sake of prosecution. We prosecute with the belief that all things being equal, and above all that we're going to get conviction. Such prosecution should be welcome. But any prosecution that is likely to fall short is, for me, waste of money. And the taxpayer should be worried about that waste of money. So it is not the problem of the prosecutor, but the investigators should also do sufficient work so that the ammunition available to the prosecutor is the best they can have in order to achieve conviction, as the case may be.
And let's do a little more on the professional training of lawyers, for instance. And it's been suggested in some quarters that law should be a second degree and not just a first degree. So as to make sure that whoever is going to practice law is well grounded in the first place before going into study law. What are your views on that?
Well, I share that view, though many disagree with me in that regard. I share that view not in terms of quality or in terms of research-based distillation that graduate students are better off. It has been tried over a period of time. There were instances where you have part-time students in those days together with young entrants into the law faculty, and in the course of examination you find that the young ones will always do better. So there is no empirical evidence or data to show that being a graduate student puts you miles ahead of the young one who has not been, privileged to go into any other higher education apart from secondary school. So we must have that at the back of our mind. But what informs my choice of a graduate program is the need for us to make sure that we whittle down to a very large extent the numbers. Apart from the issue of maturity coming into the program, we whittle down the numbers. Whittle down the numbers in the sense that how many people are really interested in pursuing law degree haven't gotten a first degree in other discipline. A good number of them may decide, now that we have gotten a degree in psychology or economics or history, as the case may be, let us continue along that line. Maybe we can get a job in the bank or go into one other profession or into do accounting or any other thing, but not necessarily law. With that, you find out that this whole idea of churning out about 6,000 lawyers every year will obviously whittle down, in the sense that 1,000 I can come to terms with, 2,000 we can manage, but for God's sake, what are we doing with 6,000? Where are they going to fit in? And where do they fit in? And who are these 6,000 people? What quality have they come with to the law school? And who are their teachers? Where do you get the teachers from? So it's an all-comers affair to a very large extent now, that anybody who obviously finishes or is tired of legal practice wants to jump in and stand before students and say you are teaching. You don't have the passion, you don't have the commitment, you don't have the research orientation, among so many other things. That is without prejudice to the fact that you may have taken a master's degree somewhere along the line. So to that extent, we feel that we are short in terms of teachers, we are short in terms of quality law faculties, we are short in terms of the fact that the law school is overburdened by this large number of people, all conducing to the point that, look, the time has come for us to whittle down. And the only way to whittle down is to make sure that you are first and foremost a graduate. And wherever you now determine that you want to read law, then you can now apply to read law. That's what obtains in the United States of America, and it has worked for them. And mark you, in some other Ivy League schools, even if you take a master's degree from London School of Economics or from Cambridge and you want to go to Harvard, firstly, they want to tell you that you're going to repeat your master's degree. That is their standard, and they don't compromise it. That's one. Two is that there are instances, if you even want to pursue a PhD, a doctoral program, they will tell you that you have to work for a given period of time, maybe 3 years. What are they trying to achieve by telling you that you have to? They want you to come in with a work experience in addition to whatever degree you class you would have taken out of the university, whether it is a first class or thereabout. You have to come with a work experience. Why do they do all those things? They do those things to make sure that the candidate